Hello, my name is Paul Stovall. I'm a student doing research on the age of prohibition. Prohibition of what, you'd ask? Well, that's something I don't plan on ever consuming, namely alcohol. Prohibition had a great impact on the economy, the law, and the culture of the American people. Let us take a closer look at this particular event in history.
In 1919, the United States Congress approved the 18th Amendment, which stated, "After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or the exportation thereof from the United States, and territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes, is hereby prohibited." The source of prohibition mainly came from women and temperance movements. The U.S. was split into two sides. One side was called the wet side, with people wanting alcohol, and the other side was the dry side, where people banned alcohol. After the 18th Amendment, this kind of bottle parade would be impossible. What's worse is that people who worked in this industry lost their jobs, which further exacerbated the Great Depression. Inevitably, this resulted in forming a new kind of industry, bootlegging. One of the most famous bootleggers was Al Capone. This man illegally supplied hard liquor to the public through secret bars called speakeasies.
The federal government suspected illegal alcohol consumption and hired government agents who would spy on the citizens and eventually discover the secret bars and shut them down. Ironically, there's a loophole. The government agents were not paid enough, and the bootleggers sometimes bribed them to keep their mouths shut. The area of the Sammamish Plateau was a big party place far from large cities, surrounded by forest. Here we are at the historical site of Sammamish, the Reared Freed farmhouse, which is the only building that survived the new construction to this day. Locals tell stories about a couple of bootleggers who rented out this property and constructed a still in the barn. They were caught by police buying excessive amounts of sugar in Issaquah. The two men were arrested and spent time in the Issaquah jail.
In the 1932 presidential campaign, Franklin D. Roosevelt offered to ban the 18th Amendment, winning the hearts of the many American people in the election, and later signed the 21st Amendment shutting down the 18th Amendment.
Legalizing alcohol sale resulted in taxable income, which in turn helped pay the national debt. One of those businesses, built in the year 1893, was directly impacted by Prohibition, and it was called the Cave Tavern, which is nowadays called the Vintage Cafe in Everett, Washington. Let's go inside and check it out. We have the pleasure of interviewing the owner of the Vintage Cafe, Jim. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you.
How long has this cafe been open for?
The Vintage Cafe has been here with the same owner for only 8 years.
Okay.
And before that, it was called Aaron's Restaurant.
Okay.
And before that, it was called the Alley Restaurant. So my wife and I have been here for 35 years.
Wow, okay.
We've changed the name a couple times because we remodeled inside, so we decided to change the name. Prior to 1976, when my wife opened up, it was called the Lock, Stock, and Barrel, but a very short time. Prior to that, it was called the Cave Tavern.
Mm-hmm.
It was called the Cave Tavern before Prohibition. During Prohibition, it was called the Cave Ice Cream and Confectionery.
Okay.
So it was not a speakeasy like some people think. They didn't sell illegal alcohol here.
Mm-hmm.
It was
sold ice cream?
So during Prohibition, they changed it into selling confectionery, chocolates, and ice cream.
And they were selling regular food.
And very little regular food, because it was more of a sweet shop.
Oh, okay.
More of a sweet shop.
Okay. Do you think that other people were angry during Prohibition? Did they have different points of view during Prohibition?
I think during Prohibition, I don't think angry. I think it was more of a point that it was taking away a right that people thought they had. Freedom of speech, freedom of some of their freedom was taken away by taking away alcohol, which turned around to in the late 20s. Most people only remember the mob or the mafia and those type of things in New York and Chicago, with the gangsters opening up the speakeasies and selling and rum runners and things like that. As far as angry, if you wanted to get a drink, I think there was always a place there was always somebody you knew that knew somebody that could have a drink. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there was a lot of people that made a lot of money during Prohibition by selling illegal alcohol, but the government didn't make any money. They actually spent more money because they had to have police officers breaking the stills and breaking up the speakeasies, and if I remember, there were 30,000 speakeasies just in New York. Seattle, I know, had a couple. We had at least one speakeasy in Everett, and it's on the east end of Hewitt.
Do you think Prohibition did any good?
I don't know if it did real good for the gangsters, but I don't think it did what it was supposed to do in trying to maybe make people not get drunk all the time and be social drinkers. So, but the end of Prohibition actually was better because it started raising the tax revenue for the government.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of privatizing alcohol?
I think the privatizing of alcohol would be a good thing in the state of Washington because the prices would be reduced. The state would still get their tax revenue. It's kind of iffy whether it would produce more jobs because there are already jobs at the state liquor stores. If they became privatized, there would maybe be more liquor stores and maybe the employment would go up. Mm-hmm. So it's an iffy time going private, having private liquor stores. They do in California, and they seem to do real well.
Well, it's a pleasure to interview you today. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Although the days of Prohibition are over, the state government is still in control of alcohol distribution. In order to buy a bottle of distilled liquor, one has to go to a state-owned store. Currently, Costco is leading the campaign against state government monopoly. They are hoping to collect enough signatures for the Initiative 1100, which would allow private stores to sell distilled liquor.
In conclusion, we learned that prohibition failed to serve its purpose. Apparently, there should be a way to find a compromise between what people want and what people need. The work to solve the problem is still going on, as people are trying to pass the legislature to privatize alcohol in the state of Washington.